Lawrence, over here, please.
What? I'm occupied here. Luna's voice became considerably more serious and postured, uncharacteristically so.
You would be best suited, I'm afraid.
Her voice grew closer, and holding both needle and tube, he turned slightly, so as to not disturb the instruments, away from the man in the chair and back towards Luna as she appeared in the opening. Behind her stood a twitchingly nervous man, healthy in appearance, but it was not the only thing that made him appear malplaced. He adorned a sharply and neat fashion. A black velveteen vest with floral patterns and a marine blue coat. Dark combed back hair and a thinly trimmed mustache. It seemed more like he had accidentally stumbled into the wrong part of town and was now terrified of the surroundings, wanting only immediate directions out of there. Lawrence gave what he was holding to German and with a nod handed over the task entirely before turning to the pair in waiting. He initially turned to Luna, but she simply leered over towards the man, whom he instead directed his attention towards. "Good day to you. Was there something specific you needed help with?" The man looked around, as if trying to not be seen by certain characters. "Good day." He spoke quickly, and with a higher pitched voice one would deem uncanny for his appearance. "I heard that you had remedy for any sickness." The only unhealthy thing apparent about him would be his tremoring nervosity, but the answer would still be the same. "Yes, indeed. We have yet to find a condition resistant to our treatment. But as you can see, there are many more waiting to receive our aid." He turned his head around to the filled spaces of patients waiting for the administration to run its course. The man nodded as he looked around as well, not striking as to have picked up on the hint. "What exactly is the treatment, if I may ask?" "What exactly is your ailment? There are only so many of us, and all is needed to tend to these poor people, as you can see." "Right. I was just
It's his wife,"
Luna interrupted in an exhaled answer, surely also smitten by the feeling of urgency.
"She's the one who's sick. But he insisted it is an incurable affliction."
"It matters not. As I said, so far nothing has been able to withstand the blood." "So, it's true," he stammered. "The holy blood. Is that it?" He pointed to the vial strung up next to the patient German was currently treating. "That it is. Now, if you got your answers, I suggest you propose this to your dear lady. Whatever it is, we can relieve it from her." He swallowed and bit his lip. "Then come. Hurry." He spun around and almost tripped over himself as he darted away towards the exit, shuffling between the different scholars and patients. Lawrence and Luna only looked briefly to each other before setting off after him. Hey, is there an emergency we should be aware of?" When the crowd of people cleared, They were spurred to follow him more hurriedly, as a grandiose carriage revealed itself to have been positioned right outside. The coachman had left his seat and taken up a form of defensive position next to the vehicle, but the presence of the horse seemed to alone keep people at bay. But regardless of the curious carriage, most were gathered before the statue in the yard, as it commonly served as a space for worship. The bearded coachman grew instantly more relaxed, seeing them approach, and stood by the door to open it.
"In here,"
the man said over his shoulder to them.
"I had almost allowed myself to accept it, but my faith persisted, and I knew in my heart that this was not to be our fate."
Inside, laying flat on an improvised bedding, was a sleeping young woman, deathly pale and dressed in a sort of formal nightgown.
"I prayed and I prayed. Then I heard it. The gods' miracle resided here."
Luna reached under the bottom of the woman's dress and felt at her ankle. When that did not yield what she had sought, she crawled inside. The sudden movement made the man instinctively reach out after her, but caught himself. She gingerly stepped around the woman and felt at her neck.
She's barely alive. How long has she been like this?
"A few days, but she has been sick for a long time."
The man was now on the verge of tears.
"We can't feed her properly, and our time is running out. Please, tell me your blood can wake her. Tell me you can answer my prayers."
Lawrence, in a short moment when looking upon the unfortunate soul, felt like a father looking to his saddened child. It struck him a bit strange, but the feeling did not linger long.
"The gods have yet to let us down. I am confident the blood's treatment will be successful."
The man could only muster a short eruptive sob as answer, but quickly contained his grief or happiness. He motioned to the coachman who entered the carriage to help Luna carefully lift up the lavish stretcher and through the narrow door. German appeared in the gateway, apparently done with the procedure left to him, and was quick to take over after Luna.
Hey, are there room for..."
German turned his head back inside as he made an effort to, as gently as possible, place the woman down to the ground, an action that the coachman seemed to not fully agree with.
"Sure, soon enough. Line is open."
The man, who had just recently knelt down over his wife, suddenly stumbled to his feet.
"What? Room? You can take her now, right?"
Soon. We only have equipment for so many. It'll free up soon."
No.
The protest grew into a grunted mumble as his hands started fumbling for a small purse.
"I'll pay. Just take her now. Do what you need, but do it now, please."
Lawrence was quick to place his hand over the money being pulled forth. Seeing the high sum he was about to prepare almost made his hand burn with regret.
"Just don't. things move rather quickly. We'll make sure she gets taken care of. Gammon, would you?
As soon as he uttered the first syllable of his name, he had thrown himself down to grasp at the handles of the stretcher.
Let's go.
He lifted the thing. The coachman struggled slightly to get with the pace.
There now. Perhaps you'll consider a donation instead of straight payment. No one else pays, so...
The man mumbled something in agreement through a running nose. In the door, they met with yet another patient, fresh from the treatment, having the usual information run by him by one of the scholars. They were all to return upon the slightest discomfort, also to return for a medical examination 2 days later. Much of the operation was solely about attendance of returning patients, amidst a growing number of new ones, all arriving by a rumor they had no control over. He rushed up to the scholar dealing with the departing patient.
Did a room just open up?
It did. No end to the sick, it seems. This way.
They were led into one of the much smaller spaces, which made Lawrence curious about the perturbed husband's reaction. He did not seem to notice, despite the appearance of someone who in most cases would complain of maltreatment.
Could we get a sick bed in here? And help me clean these right away.
German raised his eyebrows at him and looked down at what he was currently tasked with.
Oh, place her here for now. Does she need a bed?
The man asked timidly. He looked with slight bewilderment into the man's eyes. Although they were desperate, they were quite lucid and determined.
You tell me. Just make it happen. If you can do it as she is, then please. Right. Get these.
Luna and the other scholar had already left with the used equipment. Proudly he could see that a pattern of process had been developed, albeit a pattern that would not endure with time. Soon new instruments were brought, and the well-practiced operation began. Pure blood into the flask, instruments prepared, needle in arm, blood drained and mixed with the holy essence. Then there was only the thrilling and daunting period of waiting left. Her husband holding the hand of the arm, bearing the needle the entire time. While Lawrence intended to remain, the others were quick to depart for more pressing duties.
Now, sir, it may take some time. Is there anything else you could tell me about her condition?
The distraught face of the man disturbed him, and he strongly felt the need to try and relieve it.
No one knew. No doctor did. Therefore, none could treat her.
He laid his other hand upon hers, which he was already stroking lovingly. It seemed his grip tightened just a touch as he bit his lip.
Some even said she was already dead. Bastards.
Lawrence resumed, peering with feigned focus into the blood. To the sound of the operation and constant activity from outside, paired with the rushing, to and fro by various individuals outside the compartment doorway, the excruciatingly long period he experienced seemed surreal. With him standing idle and counting dust grains for each second, it seemed he was completely outside the proper flow of time as the others experienced it, next to the man with his ailing lover. But suddenly he saw the color on her face, slowly returning like the first glow of the morning sun. The man was almost shaking where he sat. The vial of holy blood was all but empty. Her breathing became more pronounced. He felt at her neck, and the pulse was as it should. The man stood up as if startled. His surprise was an argument for a previously wavering faith, one that had now properly been proven firm. Astonished, he looked at Lawrence. He in turn tilted his head over at her. He leaned over to gently pluck the needle from her arm, then removed the tube and drip stand, giving the husband his place. He sat back down, shoved over the chair closer to her face, and leaned to gently whisper,
"Darling, it's... Oh, please, wake up, would you?"
He leaned back hurriedly, afraid of the slightest reaction. None were given. He waited a moment. Then he took her hand once more and kissed it. Her head turned to the side slowly, then back again. A deep breath was taken, then out as her eyes flickered. They opened, visibly for the first time after an outdrawn slumber. They found him quickly and met his gaze. Saying nothing, and with eyes not open wide, she lay still. Luna carefully peeked inside. Noticing the improvement, she remained quiet as she sneaked up beside Lawrence, holding 2 steaming teacups, one of which she held out to him. The woman blinked and gave a smile to her husband. He leaned over ever so calmly and gently to lay his head next to hers, face down in the pillow. His back shuddered from the weeping, and the woman's hands found themselves crawling up to be placed upon it, making the shaking movements recede. The sight had Lawrence search with his hand for Luna's, which he found and held tight. She squeezed back gingerly. With even redder eyes, the man looked up at them.
Oh, by the gods.
He smiled greatly.
Oh, by the gods indeed. Oh, praise you, brave clerics. Thank the most holy that you brought her back to me.
Lawrence found himself only able to say one thing, for he could not think of anything else. The blood really is magnificent.
Lawrence?
When he turned, Carol and her acquaintance Imogen stood in the opening. They seemed currently to be blocking the foot traffic in the center walkway, so he motioned them inside. Despite wearing a slightly similar hued green dress with matching black vests, he thought it amusing how their personality appeared so unlike. Carol, with her blonde hair in a neatly kept braid, was like a preserved statue of perfection, while Imogen had her long auburn hair wildly flowing down her back and over her shoulders. Although tasteful, seemed not to be tamed even by herself. Additionally, while Carol stood with her shoulders tensed and hands folded over her waist, Imogen stood with her back straight and hands on her hips. Yes, how can I help you?
There is a revelation I wish to share. Perhaps you can spare the time?
He looked down at his apron, slightly stained with blood, then over at the patient in the chair, with Maria leaning over him, dressed similarly and currently administering blood. Can it possibly wait a short moment?
Certainly. It's about the blood,
Imogen added, to which Lawrence fully turned to them. Truly?
Yes. Carol here does a good job at downplaying her achievements. But it's quite the breakthrough, if I do say so myself.
Maria pushed him towards the two.
I got this.
Oh, are you sure?
You are just in the way. I'll be fine without you.
But I would not want to... She looked into his eyes and flashed a smile.
I'm just playing with you, but you can spare the time. Go.
He smiled back, feeling warm by her gesture. All right. It struck him only from that instant that perhaps Maria tended to become someone else while treating their patients. That is to say, one could see it in her reinvigorated demeanor overall, and a similar engaged personality returned, one only previously seen down in the labyrinth. He removed his long black gloves and motioned to the two of them to walk outside before him. They followed the current of people down the center row and eventually broke off from the flow and entered into the walled-off space in the back of the church, where they simply stood to the side. Not being entirely alone, some people were lounging from the hard work, be it tending to the people in some way, or finding reprieve from subterranean prospecting.
Alright, this is truly exciting. You recall how we started to search old references of the divine Elden?
He nodded.
Well, tell him, Carol. Oh, it's not done yet, but... Oh, skip the rune. Just tell him what it will become.
Imogen's face was almost bursting with excitement, to the degree she could not fully stand still in place.
So, it became quite interesting with a rune forming to represent Elden, right?
Wait, pardon, but I must have misunderstood. I thought it was not necessarily Elden, or even a named god. Just the entity of a great one, from the labyrinth.
Yes, well, I like to call it, well, him, Elden. For I believe it it might truly be him. Or at least what everyone throughout history has considered to be him. At any rate, what struck me was that this Erdon, seeing how his presence caught me, must have been one of the great ones of Thumeru. Meaning the great ones of Thumeru likely became the inspiration to the gods of our time.
Aha. Well, I thought that was more or less confirmed already. Imogen tilted her head and placed one hand on her waist.
Not officially. You should try and research the subject with all of this current religious dogma. But true, the notion is not exactly new. No, what we mean is significant is that it may explain much and further explain the rune I have been working. It could explain why the Thumerians imbibed blood to begin with. It was for the purpose of communion, to become closer with the Great Ones.
Lawrence nodded and raised his eyebrows. He was able to lay most of the pieces together suddenly, making him wonder if this was how Carol always felt while conceiving her runes. For the act of communion had long been referenced during many points in history, and had, like they were saying, originated with the Thumerians.
You see? But Erdon is significant, for I believe Erdon lacks any form, which may sound strange, but he may not have ever existed in any such capacity, making me believe communion was carried out in the specific purpose to act as a medium for him. There are countless accounts, legends and myth where heroes or sages engage in a ritual involving a liquid of sorts, probably stemming from the fact of blood usage, and are imparted wisdom or gifts in many ways. Most commonly, it is a way of being given children or heirs to one's lineage.
Lawrence continued to nod and hum until he felt their revelation had struck him in the same capacity as well.
Ah, and here we are, inadvertently seeking the blood as a form of medium, and are subsequently being given its gifts.
The two of them smiled.
Exactly. And I believe the pursuit of communion is not only a means to understand, but to partake of the very essence of what is defining the great divinity. It has, after all, been done since time immemorial, but only now is being done with the, shall we say, most valuable of mediums.
He could not help but to snigger in awe to himself while putting his arms to his sides.
Well, I'll be. And to think, we arrived at this conclusion with science, not faith. Or one could say, all of this.
He gestured towards the broader room.
This that we are doing right now was always intended to happen, for all to gather in grand communion.
The two of them eagerly nodded.
With it, I'm sure, our understanding will grow, like we always thought it would.
You say there is a rune describing the phenomena of great communion?
Well, not yet. I feel I must truly understand it. But with Imogene's help, we are sure to make it soon.
Well, once it is done, I would like to see it. Even make it our seal. Would it not be fitting? So that all partaking of communion would understand our goal.
You choose. This one?
Lawrence glanced past his own reflection in the mirror to see Luna holding up a dark green shawl, then to switch it out for a dark red one.
Or this one?
Being more attentive with his cravat, he only muttered and left the matter to Carol, seated on the sofa, whom Luna turned to after having not comprehended his preference. She fiddled with a trail of her wavy hair.
The green one.
Luna threw the rejected piece to the side and equally dramatically flung the chosen, thin fabric shawl over her shoulders, creating a fine complement to the even darker green dress. She performed a spin and posed for Lawrence, looking at him through the mirror.
Well, hard to match, wouldn't you say?
I'm confident only Carol would be your equal there, Lawrence complimented, while still mostly focused on his own adornments.
Maria will be coming, right?
I'm sure she will.
Why isn't she here? We could have had plenty of fun getting ready.
He felt satisfied and turned away from the mirror. I don't know. They stayed behind. They should be here any time now.
They better remember their etiquettes to uphold.
Luna flung herself onto the sofa next to Carol. Their small apartment descended into darker hues with the setting of the sun, visible through the large windows in the tilted ceiling. They were not kept in waiting terribly long until there was a knocking at their door. Lawrence, who was the only one standing, moved to greet the newcomers. There you are. You're early. German and Maria entered, him being more appropriately dressed for the occasion than her, sporting a green vest over a beige shirt, paired with dark burgundy pants. He had chosen a similar white cravat as Lawrence, and had combed his hair backwards. Maria, however, had not been bothered and was wearing a dark grey dress that appeared dreadfully ordinary.
Yes! Thank the gods, Maria! You aren't done!
Luna jumped up excitedly at their arrival.
Well, actually...
Maria began her argument, but was jerked away by Luna before being able to continue.
There are several articles I have been dying to try on you.
She was dragged out of the general living quarter into a door beside the kitchen corner, followed by Carol. Lawrence and German had been left standing alone in such a short time that they could barely acknowledge where the majority of the party had left to. Lucky we came when we did, German remarked. Lawrence shook his head with rolling eyes. Care for a drink while they're at it? He received a calm nod, and he walked into the adjoined kitchen pantry, producing an already opened and sampled bottle of whiskey. To think that I have never been here before, after all this time. It's quite the mansion. Lawrence scoffed at him upon returning. Hardly. But even we rarely spend any time here. With so much business at the church, this seems little like a true home. He placed the glass out for German, who had seated himself on the couch before a low table, and poured for him before himself sitting down beside him. How do the rest fare? The lads? I understand your living space has seen some additional beds. German took a sip of his drink.
Yup. It's been good for morale, actually. It's well received to have some fresh faces in our midst. Even for me, I must admit.
He brought the glass lower, his face seemingly transformed by the drink into a graven expression.
Those that remain have come so far. I think they are reminded of better times when they train with the novices. Reminds them of themselves in a way. You know?
He nodded understandingly and sampled his drink. That's good. I would not want them to feel unappreciated. The recent days have seen much change. I never would have guessed the tides to turn so... Regardless, we have the new ones to thank for increased exploration. German tilted back his head, consuming the last of his glass and placing it empty on the worn table.
Well, if it weren't for your hard work in turn.
Oh yes, that's true, I suppose. It turned out all right, fortunately.
Indeed. And what a break!
He slapped down on Lauren's left knee. An outburst of laughter came from the closed door. Their heads turned simultaneously.
Gods, what liveliness!
German chuckled, looking back towards him. Indeed. It's good. The two of them managed to consume another glass from the bottle while listening to the giggling murmur that occasionally erupted in a louder laugh.
Here she comes! Isn't she beautiful?
The door opened to Luna's singing announcement, giving way for Maria's dressed-up figure to exit firstly. They had found a black dress with a faint grey floral pattern, low neck with bare shoulders. Her hair was tied in a bun on the back of her head, braids emerging from the sides to arc downward back to unite with the bun. Despite the furious blushing, she was smiling softly. She looked exactly how he had always pictured the most primely beauties of the Canehurst court would, and he could not help himself but to be utterly baffled. Seldom was she fashionably dressed, or made a grand effort to spruce up her appearance. Not that it was needed, but seeing the effort placed was that of indescribable beauty.
See what you are doing?
Luna giggled, hands on Maria's shoulders.
You heartbreaker.
Maria giggled back at her, walked over and sat down in between the paralyzed men.
Pick your jaws from the floor, please. I may trip on them in these shoes.
Who could blame us? He glanced beyond her radiant figure to German, who had never in his years of knowing him had such wide eyes as he looked upon her.
Just imagine Maria dancing. I do hope there will be dancing. Just think of her agility on the ballroom floor.
Luna danced over to sit down sideways on the armrest, one arm stretching over to Maria and the other back to Carol, which they grasped and united.
It would be a sight indeed. And speaking of,
Lauren stood.
we ought to get going.
Outside the carriage window shone a warm and convivial light. For reference, Lawrence turned to Maria for a discernible expression. The grand mansion of the mayor of Yarnham, another of its like, was something he never before had attended. To him, Maria would be the one with the proper experience to be an expert at attending such events. There was indeed a certain glow in her eyes, not to be confused by the glow emitted from the building. His conclusion arrived at her being impressed, but not that impressed. Their acting coachman, German, made halt at the pinnacle of the gravel roundabout, encircling a fountain just outside the manor entrance. A houseman approached, and German hollered at him.
"Would you station this for me, if you'd please? I'm expected to attend inside."
The young man stopped in his tracks to examine the rider. It was but a brief moment of hesitation before he acted accordingly and swiftly approached the driver's seat. German appeared outside the door to open it for them and extended a hand for Luna.
I can get used to this.
She smirked at him, graciously placing her hand in his while stepping out. Even Lawrence was offered a hand while exiting. The carriage rolled away behind them. Voices of merriment sounded dampened from inside the large black wooden entrance door. So too did faint music play, the mark of a high-end feast. The feeling was an alien one, standing before such a gathering. Just earlier in the same day had all of them greeted the sick, worn blood-stained clothes, and suffered the cacophony of echoing voices, but now stood before the abode of the upstanding elite. It made them all hesitate, until the feeling in itself felt too queer to be standing sheepish outside in the dark. Lawrence went to knock. The door quickly opened by a butler who ushered them inside without a word. The festivities sounded much louder upon the opening of the door. The entry hall was one decorated with fine, dark lacquered wood. A massive dual curved stair leading to the upper floor outfitted the end of the open floor of black marble with a white flower pattern. The room was well lit with a large chandelier hanging above the gathering of colorful aristocrats chatting amongst themselves. Perhaps a number of 15 or 20 people. A hard estimation to make, with the nerves of anxiety slowly bubbling up from Lauren's belly. From time to time, a look would be aimed their way, but quickly averted back to their previous engagement, none paying much attention to the unknown newcomers. Some looked with a hint of utter disinterest, others with something reminiscent of recognition. A familiar face came out from the mask of elitism. A friendly face accompanied by an equally enthusiastic and friendly companion.
Welcome, welcome. Fashionably late, I see.
He bowed to them in greeting. The woman next to him curtsied. Then he reached to shake Lauren's hand heartily and sincerely.
Good to see you again, Stuart.
The man went along to the next hand to shake, which was German's.
Everyone is practically on their toes to greet you all. You can just feel the tremble of anticipation in the room.
Oh well, how nice.
It was surely meant as a compliment, but unfortunately fueled the anxiety. He wished he was as carefree towards the aristocracy as most of his friends. German being casual as always, and Maria being accustomed to an expert level, despite having been so far removed from the environment. Stuart took a step back, after having greeted them all personally.
Oh, you know it by now, but customary, in all her lovely and healthy glory, my wife, Maiden.
The woman, being familiar from several treatments and orderly inquiries of health, stepped forward to hold her husband around the elbow.
A pleasure to meet under more cheerful circumstances for once.
Lawrence bowed, for the first time being properly and dignifiedly introduced to the light of Stuart's life. A light that remained lit, thanks to them. She blushed.
I'm certain my Stuart has already thanked you profusely. But there will never be enough thanks from us for what you did. Your acts of gratitude,
Luna added with a curtsy,
are in turn worthy of praise. Much more of treatments like you received have been possible for so many others, thanks to the resources you provide. By now, we ought to thank you.
It is a blessing that should have its grace reach as long as possible. To give to your cause is its own reward. But let's continue. My brother, for one, is eager to meet you all.
They managed but a few steps before being blocked by a tall, sharp yet ceremoniously dressed man. For a moment, the man's bearded face seemed sinister, but switched instantly to a warm, almost fatherly smile.
Scouring off to Ethelbert before allowing the rest of us proper introduction.
The accusation appeared malicious at first, but once more that spirit vanished with a hearty laugh.
Of course, 'tis his event. I'm sure he's overwhelmed by anticipation.
He spoke slowly and articulate, carefully placing each syllable in his mouth with a deep tone. Stuart appeared uncomfortable in the tall man's presence, who then bowed in greeting to them and stretched out a lean hand to Lawrence.
Lugarius,
he presented himself as, still smiling as he shook his hand.
Lawrence.
For such a slender build, judging by his grip, he was uncomfortably strong. Then he directly turned with an extended hand to German, who reciprocated with a tense grasp.
Gammon.
Logarius' smile broadened under his beard.
I understand you oversee the task of exploring the tomb of the gods.
That is correct, Mr. Logarius. Together with Lady Maria here, we are responsible for the acquisition of the good blood.
Logarius looked down at Maria, who curtsied, and he himself bowed slightly.
I've heard of you both, and of your prowess. I am simply floored by it. Though now is not the time for business. I am, however, eager to get involved in any way possible. As I understand, you are looking for aid in that regard.
You have heard right then.
German responded, a bit caught off guard.
Anyone who has a strong heart can sign up. Training is provided by us, so all are welcome.
Excellent. Then I will certainly pursue the topic, but at a later date. Now is not appropriate. Besides, there are others in line.
He gave a slight bow and departed. A short muttering from Stuart followed his leave, who then turned to them.
Yes, that was as stated. Logarius. Quite eccentric, that one. Never really figured out what he does for income. But his income is plenty.
He seemed rather eager to have a peek in the labyrinth, Lawrence said, mostly to German.
Oh, not surprising. He is very involved with religious matters. Yet I don't believe him to be a cleric. Just a deeply faithful man, at the least.
He pondered, before dropping the enigma.
Anyway, the feast has not begun until you've been introduced to my brother.
The excitement returned to him, and he led them into the adjacent room. They were escorted through a corridor that had them emerge into a grand dining hall, where servants yet prepared. On the opposite side of the room stood a man and a woman, the man being fairly similar in appearance to Stuart. As they entered, he looked up and his face lit up in a smile.
Ethelbert, let me introduce the good cleric scholars of the old blood.
Stuart shouted from the end of the room. The pair at the other end of a long table hastily walked towards them. Mayor Ethelbert was a sturdy-built man, not fat, but not made of entirely muscles either, as it appeared. His grin upon seeing them almost stretched all the width between his black mutton chops. He shook each of their hands decisively and firmly, the true and practiced handshake of a mayor who had shaken countless hands before. He muttered his appreciation at them attending, while taking his time with each greeting, until he eventually stepped back.
It's a grand pleasure to meet such upstanding citizens. Not only do you have my gratitude for saving the precious life of my sister-in-law, but have also saved the life of so many of our city's good folk.
Mayor Ethelbert reached out for his wife in introduction.
My darling, Everly, largely responsible for the many treats soon to be on our table.
She quietly, and humbled by her husband's praise, greeted them.
It is a great pleasure to invite such selfless clerics into our home.
The pleasure is entirely ours, Lawrence gratefully responded. With your support, not nearly as much would have been achieved.
It's a matter of great importance for me, with the authority I'm occupying. This work of yours ought to flourish. And what miracles! Who am I in the eyes of the gods to not recognize such blessed endeavors?
His wife attracted his attention with a whisper, and before taking her leave, curtsied with her gallant dress lifted slightly on the sides.
It would appear dinner is ready. Steward, would you call in the dignitaries?
Stuart nodded politely and left for the large door. The party from the entrance, which they had slyly evaded, entered. The gathered elite were quick to hustle their way over to them with curious and eager expressions. As the group descended upon them, they were swiftly separated from each other by people quickly stepping in front of their faces to get their attention. German and Maria had their second encounter with Lugarius and another fellow. Luna was swarmed by 4 dashing gentlemen, seemingly not as interested in her work as in her character. Caril was lastly separated from him, as a scholarly older gentleman with thick glasses stepped between them, who quickly engaged her in a deep conversation about a subject unbeknownst to Lawrence. Himself came face to face with 2 characters.
Dr. Corin.
The man introduced himself with a firm handshake, followed by a more gentler greeting by a middle-aged woman.
Elvina, a pleasure to make your acquaintance.
Likewise, Lawrence.
I trust you can imagine one's professional curiosity at your craft. A simple blood administration. I am struck.
Unlike what his words indicated, the doctor's monotone voice contradicted his astonishment, bearing little of excitement nor awe. Quite. But then again, it's no ordinary blood.
Yes, that is true. Perhaps you'll allow me a visit. Regrettably, I was one of many who believed the life of dear Hayden could not be saved. But I am one of few who do not shy from our errors, and are most curious about the method that restored her health.
That would certainly be arranged. To have your professional opinion on our treatments would be much appreciated. The unwavering expression the doctor had been maintaining relaxed a bit in approval.
May I also inquire?
The woman, Elvina, spoke up.
While on the topic of the blood, I am a professor in biology, infinitely curious about this blood. It's hard to imagine a field where science and divinity can merge, but it seems this is it. For it truly is the blood of the gods.
She looked at him hopefully, and was almost nervous in anticipation of his answer. Well, with much research in the blood itself, combined with many depictions and materials from the Thumerian labyrinth, we are certain it can be nothing else than the god's own blood. Elvina almost shuddered in excitement.
Have you seen them? I mean, where did you take the blood from?
Thus far, our prospectors find preserved storages with the blood. There are strong speculations that there are bodies of the gods that lie deep inside, but the labyrinth is so much larger than words.
Whatever the case, the effects are plain to see. Nothing short of the god's work could explain its wonders.
Truly, a blessing indeed.
Elvina leered towards Lawrence, something of a suspicious expression, yet not one he was directly offended by. It truly is a blessing.
And what talent?
She spoke over him.
I would say, to be granted such wisdom of the gods. There must be something to you, young man.
I have put a lot of faith into my work. I can only rejoice when the gods show me such grace. She nodded at his words approvingly. So did the doctor.
Mr. Lawrence.
She bowed slightly, and walked off towards Carol, still engrossed in the same discussion, it would appear.
It's been a pleasure.
The doctor gave him his hand in parting.
We'll speak more later about that visit.
We will. He was left alone in the middle of everyone. He examined the faces that he knew and those he had yet to know. He thought a bit on what he had told the pair. He had never humored the spiritual aspect of his work. It had always been so objective, with all the evidence that faith or religion seemed to play no part. The old blood, the arcane, the deep labyrinth under their feet. Master Willem, the terrible work at the fishing hamlet. And now it had led him here, where he was now. Funny how fate can twist, as if someone was indeed twisting it. Mayor Ethelbert came shuffling towards him between the guests.
Making an impression, I trust? Enjoying the mingle?
I do, very much. Thank you dearly for inviting us. The mayor waved dismissively with his hand towards him playfully.
What do you think of the guests? Any impressions?
He looked over the faces once more, feigning contemplation. Well, it was delightful to meet Hayden properly. She and Stuart are a lovely pair.
That they are. Pinnacle of the loving pair right there. He was not himself when his better half fell into sickness.
He too was looking towards the pair in question. Then he turned back to Lawrence.
I was there once, at your church. To tell the truth, many viewed Hayden's return to health as a delirium. that a miracle had happened, or that Stuart had lost his mind. None were wise to how the impossible had happened, you see. But when I saw the ones coming inside your church, next to the ones that were leaving, well, it was the impossible.
The mayor struck Lawrence as a composed man, even in his pious fervor. A man, he thought, of extreme faith, much like the rest. His eyes were those only possessed by one of firm belief, wide in a discreet but overwhelming way. But then again, he wagered, was it too strange to think that a man who had witnessed what he just described to be much more inclined to adopt a faith in higher powers?
But I wanted first to meet the hand of God. You. And now, seeing you, your faith is unquestionable. Some hypocrites doubt the treatment, but their faith is weak. I, for one, knows the will of God when I see it, and as it was executed within my own family, it must be a sign.
Lawrence was at a loss for words. But the mayor did not mind, and he had more to say.
So, I'm going to make you an offer on behalf of the town tonight. An offer to fund everything you might need. I am only telling you now beforehand as a notice. I want everyone here to know.
The mayor smiled and patted him firmly on his shoulder, then walked away. He proceeded to saunter over to the end of the table where his wife stood. The room became quiet, and the attendant's attention shifted at him clearing his throat.
Dinner is ready to be served. Please, find a place marked with your name.
Stuart and his wife sat down next to Everleigh, who was on the dual high seat on Ethelbert's right. On the mayor's left, did Logarius find his place rather naturally. It was next to him Lawrence discovered his own marking. A little folded note on his platter. Fortunately, Luna sat next to him. On the opposite, next to Stuart's wife, did German, Carol and Maria find their places. Servants swarmed out from the door at the end corner behind the host pair, each armed with plates filled with radiant food. They skillfully slipped each guest a platter in front of them, then silently disappeared. Everleigh stood from her chair to present the meal with a low, melodious voice.
First course. Truffle wrapped in sliced sausages of 7 spices, paired with the lushest vegetables from our own farmsteads here in Yarnum.
The servants came back out, each now carrying dusty, dark wine bottles.
With a Solianguis vintage, 1672.
She sat back down and had her hand embraced by her husband's as wine was poured. Eventually, Ethelbert raised his filled glass at his guests.
A welcome toast. We are delighted to receive such fine guests at our table. To you.
The party reciprocated with their glasses.
Say, Mr. Lawrence?
The mayor asked after wiping his mouth delicately.
Are there perhaps any plans of expansion?
He smiled knowingly at him and spoke with great presence. In light of the previous conversation with the man, he was rendered stupefied to what to say. Thankfully, Luna quickly swallowed the food and spoke for him.
Not at all. Although it is very much needed, I would say.
I would guess so. But there must be so much in addition to treating patients, no?
Oh, absolutely. There's only so many people we can handle. Then there is the research department, where we want to discover additional benefits, proper examination of the Themarians, and of course a more conventional way of treating patients. But as we can only focus on one thing at a time, right, Lawrence?
While he only mustered an agreeing nod, the mayor continued with his point.
Yes, very wise. Your work is much too vital to be hastened. But you have seen for yourself how many. Just at this dinner table, there are who eagerly would support your cause. Expansion might come sooner than you think.
The mayor finished with a sneaky undertone. Lawrence nervously looked around the table. Lucaria sat and nodded patiently. Carol, Maria and German looked amongst one another unknowingly. Seeing them, he could not help but wonder if they were ready. Was an expansion what they wanted? Was it what the town even needed? Would growing operations separate them? But then again, this is what progress looks like. Evolution without courage, he thought, with a quick sting of brief regret.
I think the main course ought to be followed with what I have to say next.
Chatter budded out amongst the guests. Stuart and Hayden smiled to themselves. The tall and ominous Lugarius pointed his fork into one of the little wrappings. The servants emerged to swiftly remove their mostly empty plates and, equally as nimble, exchange it with a generously filled replacement of the main dish. The ritual resumed as Everley once more stood up.
Main course. Roasted codfish in white sauce, dill boiled potatoes, parsnip and carrots.
The party courteously applauded.
With that said, and before enjoying this delicious meal, I would like direct attention to our noble clerics, and to what I wish to propose.
Violent anticipation started to boil in Lauren's stomach, and warmth spread up to his breast.
With the work you all carry out with such virtuosity, I, as mayor of our city, recognize your great service. Therefore, I would like to be able to assist further by allowing the construction of a new church, completely equipped with the staff and materials that you would need in your heavenly pursuit.
Carol stared down at her plate with a face as red as a tomato and shrinking in her seat. Luna, without a concern for etiquette, just allowed her jaw to hang open. Maria and German just glared wide-eyed at Lawrence. The silence seemed to wane on Lucaria's patience, and he simply started enjoying his meal. Lawrence had never imagined such a change of operations, and was nearly as surprised as if he had not heard of the plan shortly beforehand.
Why, how kind. Most kind. A church.
A church? An entire church?
Luna leaned closer, almost entirely over his plate of food.
Indeed. Whatever you require for your clerical work. Is not a church most fitting to serve the people?
It most certainly is, good Mayor.
Lawrence leaned over to slightly and politely make Luna retract herself back into her seat. Not that a church was the ideal form of workplace, but imagery and appearance was secondary in the larger research. As long as there was space and equipment, work was possible.
I most likely speak for all of us that tonight we have all felt appreciated and been made aware exactly how the town feels about our work. We graciously accept, knowing that our future is secure and stable with such good and intelligent people at our backs.
Your holy work, Master Lawrence. Your most holy and godly work. Selflessly done for all of us. Praise and reward is our duty to the gods. Let's raise our glasses.
The mayor exclaimed and stood. Everyone else shuffled to their feet after him, glasses raised.
To Lawrence and his magnificent colleagues. To the Holy Blood.
The gathering honored in unison, all eyes towards them. Under the shattering that followed, Luna leaned over discreetly.
Are we ready for this?
He shoved a potato in his mouth, thinking and chewing.
We have to be. Imagine what research is possible now. Remember what Willem wanted.
Understanding, right? About the gods.
He nodded.
One step closer.
She inched closer with her hand to his.
All right. It was just very sudden.
Together, then?
Together.
She smiled with a thrill in her eyes. Lawrence subtly leaned closer to the mayor.
Pardon the question, but is it this easy? Doesn't Canehurst have anything to say in the matter?
Both Logarius and Ethelbert got a disgusted and scornful face.
Damn be the nobles,
Ethelbert said as he leaned closer over the table.
Their interest has always been on themselves, and more so in recent times.
Let us deal with any arising conflict. Would they appear?
Lawrence nodded, feeling conflicted with his own say in the matter. Uncertain of the future, he glimpsed over at his friends, all merry and engaged with the guests, all but Maria, who quietly observed him. He was about to tell her something comforting, but was interrupted.
But let's not discuss the hardship that lies ahead,
Ethelbert said with resumed composure,
without fully acknowledging the work yet to be done. Now eat your fill. During dessert, we start planning.
That's the long and short of it. Hands held behind his back, Dr. Corin turned at the conclusion of his speech back to her. There is nothing like practice in this trade, and with your experience, you'll surely make a good job. He had stopped by the door at the end of the hallway, prompting Maria to do the same.
I appreciate the compliment, but I may not stay long. Just so you and your fellow practitioners feel secure in the procedure.
He delayed to open the door, leering at her with an uncharacteristic sly expression. I've done this a long time, Lady Maria, and have seen many practice the craft. I have found that some, despite their education, do a terrible job. Do you perhaps know what defines one such as us? She shook her head slowly, peering to the side.
Passion, perhaps?
He nodded approvingly. Indeed, you know it. One can only do this with a passion. The passionate soul can treat anyone with little education, because they think only on one thing. He opened the door. Beyond lay a grander hall with beds lining the walls. Sick beds, some inhabited by an awaiting individual. The little speech of the doctor had vexed her. The otherwise curt man had exploded with what he surely considered invigorative knowledge. Despite having little grounds to be bothered with him, she found his spontaneous lecture aggravating. In the first bed lay an older man with one leg strung up in a higher angle to which his body currently lay. Mr. Ferreld. Dr. Corin stopped at the foot of his bed and took up the documentation detailing the patient. The senior nodded to him, not so much acknowledging Maria. How's the leg? Still broken. Quite. Well, you have waited long enough. He snapped his fingers until a nurse at the end of the room became aware. With an elevated hand, he pointed down to the patient, and the nurse leapt away into an adjacent room. Any concerns for the treatment? When's the clerics be coming? Already here, good sir. This is Lady Maria, one of the bright minds who first studied this holy blood. The man threw his eyes at her, a smile already beginning to process on his wrinkled lips.
Oh, thank you, lady. Thank the gods for this blessing. Truly.
Are there any questions you may have before we begin, Mr. Farrell?
She asked, masking her surprise at his change of demeanor. He gently shook his head, folding his fingers together over his chest.
No, my faith is pure. As long as the good clerics be treating me.
The board holding the notes was held in front of her by Dr. Corin.
You heard the man. There are other patients I can tend to.
Oh, but...
No. You are the expert here now, not me.
He walked off, passed by the nurse, dragging with her a drip stand in one hand and a blood vial in the other.
The blood, miss.
The stand was placed next to the bed, and she attached a tube to the vial, which was placed at the top.
Ah, is this the blood?
It is.
The nurse picked up a tray from a trolley bearing needles.
How similar it is. Oh, what a blessing.
She stood over him, attaching the components together, and reached for his hand, which he gave. She rolled up his sleeve and found a vein that suited her.
Now I'll just take some blood to mix.
Mr. Farrell looked straight at her face, not particularly interested in what she was saying.
And now the transfusion starts. The blood needs some time to enter your body and assimilate itself. But your leg should be healed within the day.
No prayer.
She actually smiled a bit.
No prayer needed.
Then how will it work?
It is science. This is how the blood works.
Science? I thought ye be clerics.
Well,
no science ever helped me, no sir. I have kept faithful all me days, and it have kept me good.
His smile faded, and she caught herself surprised with feeling a grave disappointment that it had gone.
I am working with the blood of the gods. Science or no, is not a cleric those that convey the will of the gods?
About right.
So, even if I call it a scientific process, it is still a divine one, yes?
He mustered back the smile once lost and chuckled.
I suppose. But mostly a cleric to me.
Good then. Now, after you have noticed the effect, you will feel very invigorated. But I advise resting despite the overwhelming sensation. Later it might make you very tired. Just so you're aware. Oh, and do not be alarmed if you see anything strange, such as little people.
Why, of course I would want to see the divine messengers.
How else would a blessing reach me?
Very good. I'll leave you for now. Call when you notice anything, alright?
Thank you, Lady Maria. May the gods keep walking with ye.
As with you.
He nodded her off and tilted his head against the pillow, smiling contently. She approached the doctor, who was in the middle of his own conduction of a transfusion. He did not look up at her as she stood on the opposite side of the bedridden patient.
It seemed to go very well.
Had some practice, though. It's like clockwork by now.
And besides that?
How do you mean?
He looked at her.
Do you remember what I talked about before?
She did, and did not respond to him. He smirked for a moment. A heartfelt one.
Would you have a look here for me? Just so everything is in order.
The request struck her as a bit surprising, him being a veteran doctor. But she did so, only to confirm that he had done a meticulous job. Turning to tell him so, she only saw his back walking away.
Is it you who is the cleric?
She looked back at a younger woman lying in the bed. Perhaps her own age, brown hair and nearly as pale as herself, but of a sickly hue.
Sorry. I couldn't help but overhear, and I just... Well, I'm a tad nervous.
She fiddled with her fingers over the blanket that covered her lower body.
It being blood and all. It's perfectly understandable, but you can put your worries aside. It might be blood, but it is the blood of the gods. Oh, yes, of course. The gods must be very good to us. To you, for granting this blessing.
She had never seen it in a Yarnamite. That slight wavering of faith. So she slowly and hesitantly nudged her own hand closer to that of the woman's. Like she was desperate for the warmth of another, the woman was quick to take hold of it.
I have treated many before, and it is always the same. Yes, the gods truly are merciful to have you sent here. I can't see anyone doing a better job.
She smiled at her, touched by her words.
You rest now. Let the blood do its work.
She nodded, but held her hand a moment longer after having closed her eyes. When she released, Maria turned to catch Dr. Corin. She nodded at him with a thankful smile.
Communion. A secret symbol left by Caril, runesmith of Bergenworth. Several runes relate to blood, including communion. This rune represents the healing church and its ministers. Blood ministration is, of course, the pursuit of communion.